All right, great. Hi, anybody who's listening or watching this video. I'm Rob, this is Jenna, and today we are going to talk about core. Okay, so core, training your core. What is the core? Everybody seems to always be saying, I need more core strength. I need to work on my core. I love core exercises, core. And basically, Jenna and I want to have a conversation about it because it's not really clear what it means to have a healthy, functioning, capable of withstanding demanding physical tasks core. So, so yeah, why did you want to talk? That's why I want to talk about it. Is I just feel like people are obsessed with like working their core, but then when it comes down to it, I see like the 3 or 4 things people do for their core, and I'm like, God, there's a whole world we're not exploring of your core. What about you? What do you think about it?
Yeah, same. Everything you said, and then like I hear so much like I'll say, okay, well, what are your goals? What do you want to do? Be talking to a client, and they're like, oh, I want to strengthen my core, or I know I have a weak core, or I know, it's almost like this, like, it almost makes me wonder, like, what does that even mean? Did someone? It makes me think, okay, like, well, how do you know you have a weak core, and what does that mean? And like, I think we should like start out by saying like, all right, when we are talking about the core, like from like if I asked you what parts of the body do you consider to be the core, what would you say?
So if I were to, if somebody really wanted to know, Rob, what do you consider the core? I think about the core as any muscles that attach to bones. Okay, specifically the spine, but essentially muscles that attach to bones. Now, the kind of joke there is that all muscles do attach to bones. So I start to have the conversation with the person that basically the entire uh, musculoskeletal system is the core. You know, it creates the support of the structure of the body. If I wanted to give a more medium, more tempered answer to somebody, I might say everything between your knees to your armpits. We're going to call it your core, and we're going to work from there, which is still taking up a large region of the body. Uh, I feel like you have some like insights on that, though. You
Y-
also consider like talk about other
y-
areas of the core.
yeah, like if I was going to teach a class, like if I was going to teach a mat-based movement class and have the focus be the core, like I would probably put like specific like little neck things or specific little feet things in there, because like I literally have come to the conclusion that I really think the entire body is the core.
Yeah,
And like
yeah.
obviously if we get more specific, or like you said, like more detailed, like okay, then when I think of a core, I really think of like a canister and a pressure management system, and I think of like our rib cage and abdomen and the pelvic diaphragm, and my brain just goes to them being in relationship together. I think if you asked me this many years ago, I would have said what a lot of people probably think of, and they just think of like those six pack, rectus, like
Abs.
ab muscles. Um, I feel grateful and like lucky, and also sort of confused. Like the more you know, the more you don't know, in the sense of like there's a lot more to it. Like our breathing systems, like pelvic floor, like so many things get left out of like the core conversation, which is why we wanted to have this, why we wanted to talk about it. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, it looked like you're gonna say something.
I love how you talked about pelvic floor and breathing, because I feel like people are open to talking about breathing, right? Because we have this huge umbrella shaped respiratory muscle, which is your diaphragm, and it's big. It goes on the under part of your rib cage. It goes up and down. We take about 20 to 24,000 breaths a day. Uh, and so people are kind of like, when they get into training or exercising, they're really open to this idea of um, the diaphragm and the breath is a part of core strength, core control, core adaptability. And people are like, okay, I can get behind this. Like I've heard about meditation. I've watched professional athletes, they do breathing stuff, they breathe at a certain time during an exercise. And then the second thing you said, pelvic floor, right? And all of a sudden people like they almost like squeeze their butts and drop their hearts a little bit, and they're like pelvic floor. And I think that's an okay response. It's taboo to talk about. It's almost like you don't talk about things that are like hidden, you know, like we don't talk about genitalia when we talk about working out. We don't talk about the nether regions at all, as a matter of fact. Though I think if we could start like we're doing today is like evolving that dialogue, because you have a pelvic diaphragm, right? You have a diaphragm that literally lies in opposition of your respiratory diaphragm, and they have to
Mhm.
work together. If I want to have a strong core, I need to have a pelvic, I need to have some awareness of my pelvic floor. uh
Yeah, totally. And I think that's like a huge missing puzzle piece for a lot of people is that like kind of like you said, like you made such a good point. Like I think when I'm working with someone, I can get them behind the idea of like I'm like, all right, well, what's your diaphragm doing and what's your rib cage doing, and this is really important as far as being in relation to, you know, your other classic core muscles, but the pelvic floor is like hugely important. And it's supposed to be, you know, like it's supposed to match and have a specific pressure management system with your abs and your diaphragm. And for a lot of people, men and women, for a variety of reasons, like, you know, our sedentary lives, stress, you know, giving birth,
Trauma.
trauma, constipation, like just like a whole bunch of things can really throw off a pelvic floor. And that can make it really challenging for people in the gym. And they might not even know that a little bit of work with their pelvic floor would solve a whole host of their problems. So, and the pelvic floor is definitely part of the core, like can confirm.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like, I think about the pelvic floor as like a hammock, you know, because if you
Mhm.
look at the anatomical structure for anybody listening to this, it's like you have these bony bits of your pelvis. Your pelvis is like almost like a bowl, and then you have these bony bits underneath it. But like, it's not your pelvis doesn't just like have like skeleton, like a bone underneath it. It needs something to keep all the organs up, and that's where your pelvic floor is. Your pelvic floor is literally this hammock. I think of it as like a trampoline underneath
Mhm.
your pelvis. And so if I'm going to say that my core is like this diaphragm, my respiratory diaphragm lying at the top of uh, my thorax, my rib cage, it's like, doesn't it make sense that my pelvic diaphragm is right here, and like this is the core? So I think if you and I
Yeah.
were to kind of elaborate, the core can go in a lot of directions. I think one thing we can agree on is like this little like oval canister pressure management system. This is a really big part of the core, and I don't think we talk about that. I don't think
Yeah.
that that's happening enough.
Yeah, totally. And kind of piggybacking off of that, like once if it is brought to the conversation, I think we tend to go right towards like, well, everything needs to be strong. And it's like, well, what does that exactly mean? Because if it's a pressure management system, then we actually want to then, you know, evolve the conversation further to be like, well, are these parts in what I like to think of as like an optimal functioning like healthy relationship, or are they in like a one part is, you know, maybe you're really strong in quotes like up top, but the pelvic floor, you know what I mean, like without
Like
getting,
hypertoned and
yes,
hypotoned. Like the
exactly, like
tones are
one part is
different.
like the tones are different, right? And I think it's important to keep in mind, like to bring to the conversation, like um being strong might actually mean being reactive, or being like if for example, like with the pelvic floor, like it just comes to mind, for example, like a lot of us sometimes think we need to do like a Kegel or like squeeze our pelvic floor, but in reality, like the pelvic floor is already squeezed and really really tight. And so we actually need to learn how to relax that. And I would say that a strong pelvic floor would be one that can relax and engage when it needs to, but it's not this idea of like tensing, tightening. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a nice segue into the next part of the conversation, because if we're talking about restoring health to somebody's core or body, which is ultimately, I mean, you could probably count on your hands and feet how many people come to you and they want to work on their core. And the past 50 years, a lot of core has been like you do sit-ups, crunches, you do a lot of planks. So anyways, like people come with these visions, expectations almost on what it means to make their core better so that they feel better, right? Like, because that everybody wants to improve. And I think this is where it gets tricky, because the nuances of the core are more complex. Now, complexity can be the death of any motivation. So you don't want to overstimulate somebody. Though what to your point, the pelvic floor might already, and oftentimes is like kind of held up, like really tight, okay, really like contracted, really strong in this position. And maybe to strengthen your core and to ease some of your hip or low back pain, it needs to learn to like open and relax a little bit. From a training perspective, this takes kind of settling. You have to go be a little quiet, and it's a more, if we think about the pelvic floor as being kind of sexually charged, emotionally charged. I mean, it's a charged part of the body. It's I feel like it's tough to go and push it into shape. I feel like you kind of have to bring an awareness into it by feeling the subtleties of it through specific exercises. Wouldn't you agree with that? Like, I mean, you work with
Yeah,
people on this.
it's a lot of subtle work, and once you can kind of once we can wrap our heads around, you know, more tighter, more like efforting is not necessarily better in all cases, and we can step back and say, oh, maybe actually trying to relax it and soften it, or even like meditating or just closing the eyes, like, or even just like trying to work out or move in a way that feels a lot more subtler than these large movements, like, do things, what if I say give 10% effort instead of 80% effort, right? Then people start to see real results and like real changes. So sometimes it just comes back to like the subtlety. Something else you said that we mentioned this earlier, but like it is a really charged area, and some people have had a lot of trauma in that area, especially like women, childbirth or a whole host of other things, and getting it to, like, I've had people have like very emotional responses to us like figuring out how to relax their pelvic floor. So it can get a little which is important, because if you're having some type of problem, like some people, like they can't go on a run or they can't do a plank without feeling like they're going to pee their pants or something, or having serious pain, and like, oh, what it comes back to is actually learning how to relax something that they didn't even know was tight or gripping. So I think it's just valuable for us to like mention that it is a really nuanced conversation, and that there is an emotional, spiritual side to the core. I mean, I know you have thoughts on that area as well, right? Or
Yeah,
sorry,
well,
like the emotional, spiritual components.
well, I love that you
Sorry.
mentioned
Yeah.
how it's a charged area for women, because I want to play like the guy card a little bit and just
Okay.
talk about how so many men, it's really tough for them to conceptualize, think about, and uh, I sometimes wonder if it's even more difficult for men to bring their awareness to their pelvic floor. I remember I was working with this woman years ago, and we were just having conversations about oncology and the rectum and rectal cancer and all these different things. And we were talking about pelvic floor, and I mentioned how I work with people on pelvic floor and men. And her response, what she said to me was, "I didn't know men had a pelvic floor."
Oh.
And so anyway, I was like, wow, this is a person who's like, they're in oncology. They study like the cancer of like that part of the body and things like that, colon cancer, rectal cancer, like anything around that region. And anyway, I thought to myself, how many men must not really know that they have a pelvic floor? So
That's really interesting.
I think maybe let's segue, because this is
Yeah.
turning into a pelvic floor talk, but like let's talk about the core. Like
Okay.
what do you see people doing that you think they could change? You know, that somebody says to you, I want to do a core workout. Like, you know, what do you see? What would you advise? What do you prescribe? What do you tell somebody?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, depending on who they are, their history, their experiences, what they're doing, um, like I, I like two big things sort of came to my brain. But one is like I want to see what their core does when they're flat on their back. And I just have them like go from their feet on the floor to bringing their knees over their hips. I want
Yeah.
to like watch their whole body. I want to watch if what their head and their neck do. I want to watch what their abdomen does, what their hips did, what like their face looks like when they did it, right? And that can tell you a lot about like if they some people when they pick their feet up from the floor they use their neck only and their stomach sort of bulges up, like that's going to tell me that like, oh, okay, we're going to work on their core in these specific ways, like and then the other thing that came to mind, and then I kind of want to ask you this question back. The other thing that came to mind is like um I like to do movements that are just like full body movements. Like if I can get someone into like a good positioned lunge, and I love when they tell me like, oh, I feel my core, and I think and they feel like their abs or their stomach or their obliques, like they're feeling some cross body connection that they don't ever usually feel, especially in a lunge.
Yeah.
And that's usually like an aha moment for someone where it's something simple, but it's like, these are things that are important and they matter, and like you don't necessarily need to be doing like ab crunches to get your core working functionally. Same thing with rotations. I was just working with someone today actually. We were doing something super simple. We were holding a block or squeezing the block at the chest and rotating. She had never done that movement before, and she's like, I feel my abs. And I was like, yeah, your abs are
Hmm.
here to help you rotate, and that leads into like a whole other point I want to make, about like the six pack and what we actually want in our abdomen. But I kind of want to ask you that question back, like what do you like to look for, what do you like to think is missing from our typical core training?
I think people need to give up this idea of core having to be like a burning sensation. Like
Mm,
almost people are looking for like a lactic acid. I mean, I'll just use the bicep. So if somebody does 150 bicep curls really fast at a moderate to heavy weight, like they're going to get sore in the bicep. And I think that people don't need to treat their core that way. I think people think that if they treat their core that way by pushing it and whipping it and being like punitive about it, they're going to like get the beach look, like the six pack and all that stuff. And to a lot of those people, what I think is, first of all, like the the aesthetic change, a lot of it is in lifestyle. You know, you can listen to our other talks about just adding more movement to your life, eating a balanced uh, having a balanced life where you eat a lot of whole foods that are nutrient dense. Um, so anyways, I think people punish their core because they think it's going to give them like this like flatter stomach and stuff. And I think that starts to restrict people's motion. And I think this is what causes a lot of people pain. So I think if people are looking to train their core, incorporating breathing strategies, which I would say lying flat on your back is like the way to start. And then, like you said, you pick up a leg, what happens? Are you using your abs to lift the leg? Are you using the ligament that splits your abdomen? Are you using your neck to pick up your legs? Like what happens when I ask you to pick up your legs? It's either going to be this or that, and depending on what you do and how you do it, I'm going to address you very individually. And then the other things, I liked what you said about the cross-body connections, because when we start talking about things like rotating the rib cage and the trunk, our obliques are the big rotators on the sides and fronts, and like you don't need to kill yourself to get some abs. You need simple motions. You need to build positional strength, which means you just get into a position and you're able to breathe there. You can move slowly there. You can move quickly there. You can move dynamically. So I think people need to kind of expand their worldview of core and what it is. Because if your core is already like, part of your core is already squeezing like this and holding, and then you're just like, man, the answer is to squeeze harder and squeeze harder. And you're never learning to how to get strong here with like a long core. I think that's going to really restrict you down the line and prevent you from reaching your physical aims, whatever you want.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm like, oh yeah, it's not anyone's fault, because like we are taught that I just want to say, like, yeah, movement is not a punishment. Like I liked how you almost said, it's like people almost like train their abs in a way that is like, I need to punish myself or like brace it, or it needs to feel like that burning sensation. And I'm like, that's just incorrect. But it's like we're fed that through marketing and the commercials and like everything
Media,
that media,
such
everything we're
garbage.
it's such garbage. It really is. Everything we're flooded with is that. So it's like not anyone's fault, but it's such a bummer, because it's like, actually, you could get those aesthetic changes you're going for, and it doesn't have to be that like hard physically on your body, and it can feel good. Like, sorry to tell you, I'm not sure if that's inconvenient for some people to hear, like they like to get their punishment for the day in or whatever, but like I as you were talking, I'm like, it was such a aha moment for me, like learning that like I walked around 24/7 with like a tensioned abdomen, like I was squeezing, sucking in, like for a bunch of reasons. Like, and I think women and men do that unconsciously for a variety of reasons. Again, I think it comes from this idea that we all need to be like aesthetically like smaller, tighter, constricted, whatever. I think it comes from stress and a whole bunch of things. But just like getting on your hands and knees and seeing if you could relax your abdomen is like, and relax your diaphragm and breathe there with a relaxed stomach. I have a lot of people who actually can't. I have a lot of people who we need to do the opposite. They're great at relaxing, and we do want to learn how to get some tension there. But I have a lot of people who actually, it takes a lot of like effort for them to relax the tension of their belly, and then they notice like they have even more behind it, and there was even more tension where that came from. So I loved what you said about just like breathing, and also just like not always thinking about crunches. Like it's so much, there's so much more, and it's so much better. Like I feel like it was great news learning like, oh, actually, if you just go for a walk and relax your belly, you're like, I'm going to be better off than if I'm squeezing and trying to get a six pack.
Yeah, I think that's
I
well
think so.
said. And
um
maybe this conversation could turn into a couple conversations. Maybe we could talk about the core even more, because I feel like we're talking about the aesthetic part of it, what we see people doing. Then there's also, and we talked about the internal core, which is kind of like the
right.
deepest layer of it all. Um, yeah, core is foundational. It is the thing that bridges the gap from the upper and lower bodies. Uh, I consider it a really integrative part of the body, because I can't swing one leg forward and the opposite arm without the relationship of my core. Yet the way that people are exercising it and the way it's being propagated through social media and stuff, I wonder if I feel like people deserve more. I feel like people deserve a more sustainable approach to their abs. Like everybody wants
Totally.
abs, and I really want to give it to people. Uh, and and I feel like that's what I want to do. I want us to somehow be able to give this to people,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah,
so
totally.
fundamental. So
Yeah.
um, so what do you think? I mean, what do you
Yeah.
do with people? You lie them down. What would you tell
Yeah.
somebody? Hey, I'm at home. I want to start getting a stronger core. The way that
Right.
you and Rob are talking about it. How do I do it?
Right. Which I was thinking as you were talking, I was like, yeah, people want like, it seems, a lot of us or a lot of people really want like exercises, like it's like so that it doesn't feel overwhelming, or they're like, okay, well, I should stop doing my sit-ups. Like, what should I do? And I would, depending on who it was and who I was communicating with, all right, I would try to think of in terms of like macronutrients and then micronutrients, like how we do with food. I like to do that kind of in these conversations. So like if we're talking bigger movements and they want to work on strengthening their core, I'm asking them, are they walking, carrying, lunging, squatting? I'm thinking bigger movements, and like, are they doing them every day? And are they doing them multiple times a day in small doses? Like, I'm not saying you need to be on a walk for your 8 hours, that you need to be lunging every second, but I'm looking at their bigger movements, their larger movements. Like, are they carrying their heavy groceries, or are they getting them delivered? Like, what kind of loads are they putting on their whole body? And that's like a big question. And then I like to help them find ways to bring the whole body into it. That would be like their macronutrients, right? Are they ever hanging? Are they ever getting their arms above their head and hanging like that, right? And then micronutrient wise, that's when I would give them more like these corrective exercises that we talked about, because that's where people are gonna learn, and that's where the subtleties come in. So that's when you're on your back, and maybe we do some like dead bugs or some knees down planks, or like like that's when I might have them on their belly and see if they can like, or if they're capable of like pulling their belly button up, and seeing more of like those subtle nuances, and maybe give them some exercises more mat based like that. But again, nothing overwhelming to the system, nothing that's causing anyone's face to scrunch up, right? If they can't breathe in the position, like, we're going to come out of it, those kinds of things. So that's where I like to start. I like to think of like, find out what they're doing macro, find out what correctives they might need, and then give them a little, right? We need things in doses, small doses, a little of each, and then kind of progress from there. That seems to work relatively well. Everyone is different though. What would you do? What would you say?
Well, I feel like you kind of covered a pretty broad spectrum. So, I mean, I would almost say like
Okay.
just about like uh, everything under the sun has been said, and
Okay.
they're basic principles. Are you moving your body through space? Are you hinging at your joints? Are you picking up heavy things ever? Do you ever support your own body weight? Do you ever hold a split stance position? Do you just put one foot in front of the other just for fun, just to see how you can do it? And
Yeah.
then you work your way toward the micro movements, which are the smaller ones, having like almost like a finer motor control, like having to really dial in and pay attention to where you're creating stability in your body versus like mobility, for example. Uh, I think it's really worthwhile for people to spend time breathing, develop a breathing practice. I don't care what it is. You don't even have to call it meditation. You could literally just call it breath work. Or not that. You could say, I'm going to take 20 breaths once a day, and I'm going to sit in a chair, put my feet on the floor, press into my feet, relax my hands on my knees, and I'm just going to breathe and take 20 conscious breaths, and that's it. Because all I want people to start to do is get their diaphragm moving in a mindful way, bringing some awareness to how the muscles feel when they breathe in, how the muscles feel when they breathe out. Because ultimately, if we don't start to give the person some more awareness to their breathing patterns, I feel like everything else, it's not useless, but I want the person to feel like they're in control in any position, in any circumstance whatsoever. So can you take 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 breaths and just chill and be aware of what your breath is doing? Can you, if you're really stressed, can you use your breath to down regulate? If you notice that you're low energy and like almost fatigued, can you use your breath to kind of wake you up a little bit? Because I feel like breathing is almost like the dial. And if you can turn the dial up and turn the dial down at your own will and control, I feel like people can almost do anything. So,
Okay.
uh,
So it sounds like you're also bringing the point, which I don't know if we've explicitly stated, but you're making a really good point about like an awareness practice, like learning to notice your patterns and your tendencies, and then being able to sort of like adjust based on what you've learned about yourself. Um, so like a lot of people like might not know that they can't breathe in a certain position, or that lying down is hard for them to get 20 breaths, right? But it's like, it just from what I was taking from what you were saying is like, oh yeah, like just learning about the way your body is currently operating would be helpful for restoring your core.
yeah, yeah, I think that's a
Do you
nice
think?
way of putting it.
And I wanted to ask you as we wrap up here, let's just wind down, but I wanted to ask you really quick for any like personal anecdotes or aha moments you've had about your own core. Any any interesting tidbits you can share?
The importance of learning how to roll on the floor was a real enlightening experience for me. I think I talked about it on one of the other podcasts, but I was training for lots of events, like weightlifting competitions. I was doing triathlons. I was working out all the time, and somebody wanted me to roll, and which is basically just lying either on your back or on your stomach. And I wanted to roll with as little effort as possible. And I got stuck. I got stuck in a lot of positions that I didn't have positional strength in these really certain simple moving patterns. I was always looking for momentum, or I was always trying to like use brute strength to push through it, when really it was because like my core was so not inhibited. My core was stuck. It was like stuck, closed, and I didn't know how to uh, breathe and like relax and lengthen certain tissues to do simple things that babies that we come out of the womb learning to do at 3 months old. I couldn't roll, and that was just a huge moment for me. And I used to think I was so strong, and then I couldn't roll. And for me, it started me down the rabbit hole of like, I don't know shit about strength. And I mean, if I'm going to make my life about helping people get stronger, I need to have a much better understanding about how fundamental the core is and how deep this thing goes.
Oh, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. I think that was going to be helpful and resonate with a lot of people. What you just explained. I think a lot of people are confused that they can do certain things that make them think or they appear strong, and then very simple things are very challenging and they can't. And I think you explaining that is going to be like really helpful for people. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
encouraging people to go into that uncomfortable state of doing stuff you hate. I mean, we could talk about this sometime. People like they don't
yeah,
want to do the boring stuff. They kind of want to go on autopilot and just do things, just do the exercises. And I have a tough time relating to those situations, because when I can't do something, this is in my personality and my ego. When I can't do something, I figure out why, because I want to. If it's something I value. So if somebody says to me their core is of utmost importance to them, and then they don't want to do these smaller, simpler things because they just want to do crunches and hold planks, and like I don't even know all the weird fitness core things I see on the internet nowadays. I tell them, I'm like, if you value your core, you're going to want to learn why you struggle so much with this basic, zero point 0.1 first few exercises. Because if you
Love it.
take care of those, all the other you're only going to improve faster, injury free. But like it's endless for what you can get out of your body if you don't skip steps.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Yeah. And like we can, as we wrap up here, my sort of my last thoughts are just like, let's throw out the words tighten, tone,
Squeeze,
squeeze.
brace.
Yeah, squeeze. Yeah,
Oh
break.
my
Yeah.
gosh, no more core
There's a
bracing.
no, there's a balance, right? Balance. We don't, yeah, we can kind of throw those out. We can throw out the word punishment and yeah, totally. This is really
You
great.
want your core to, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say this is really great. I hope that this helps gets people thinking.
Yeah, that's all we're trying to do, right? Like give people some brain candy and hopefully they reach out to one of us with more questions, like, specific exercises to do. I mean, uh, that's the hope of these conversations. I think Jenna and I are trying to inform people, but also helping people, giving people enough interest to want to take actionable steps to reach out and like learn these things. Because I think in theory, oh, it's great to know, but until you put them into practice, you're really not, you're not taking the step. You're still
That
squeezing your abs. You're doing all these
yeah.
things. You want your core to be like a slingshot. You want to be able to like pull it back, and you want to be really strong here, and then you want to be really
Here.
strong when so what you said, looking for balance, that's the way to go. I hope this is
Mhm.
helpful for people.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a
Okay.
great, yeah, I think, well, let's end there.
Yeah, one
Sounds
there.
good.
Yeah.
Okay.